Hello, and welcome back, my fellow hobbits, to another video. Also, when I say fellow hobbits, of course I'm not assuming that you're short. I'm sure you're perfectly adequate, as am I, but I just assume that you, like me, admire the simple and elegant lifestyle of hobbits, and that's why you're here watching and appreciating this Shire build. But anyways, as you can see in the background, I've been working diligently with World Painter to expand the Shire and bring it to life. The landscape now ranges all the way from Buckland and the Brandywine River to the White Downs and Mickle Delving. Northward we've made it to the hills of Skerry and Binebull Wood, and the South Farthing is formed pretty near to its border. Also, I was finally able to implement Create's abilities and gave Bag End a moving, working door finally, so that's exciting as well. Also with the controversial back door, likewise works for, oh, well, there you go, of course. But excuse me for getting distracted. Today I'm not here to give you too much insight into new builds and expansion or changes. Today I had the idea to show you some of the inspirations in terms of art pieces or real-life inspirations that help me to build and form ideas for actually, building in this world and bringing some of these places to life when there's so many different influences and depictions already. I'm mainly going to be showing you some of the art pieces that have inspired me to very directly try to transcribe them into builds and some of my personal visions and motivations for certain areas. How I use art and ideas and inspiration to help me bring things to life in these builds. So first I want to take you to Bag End and show you one of the main inspirations that I used in redesigning my layout of the hill. This is a colored pencil drawing, I believe, that Tolkien did of the front porch of Bag End at the start of The Hobbit. This piece of art, I think, is really key to understanding how Tolkien envisioned Bag End and the layout of it and the land surrounding it. I'm going to very quickly go off on a little tangent about Bag End that I want to unpack a little bit with you. I want to point out what I sort of think is a little bit of a misconception about Bag End and what's been a little bit difficult in my building of it. Basically, in most depictions, as Bag End is sort of facing south in regards to its windows and its garden, and how the front hall makes a sharp left, and then you sort of go left down the hallway of Bag End. I think that's a misconception a little bit, and this is also how Karen Fonstad approached it in her Atlas of Middle-earth, which is an incredibly accurate and wonderful work that maps out Middle-earth in a very detailed way. But I think in Tolkien's mind, at least just my personal opinion and based off his illustrations and descriptions and comments, I think the hall was supposed to be more sort of straight down from the front door, and the windows and garden were facing pretty directly west. So to the left of the front door is a pretty sharp turn where the garden path sort of runs north. Of course, it's possible that Tolkien sort of changed his idea in developing Lord of the Rings and whatnot, but I think his original idea was that it was very much like this illustration that he made when he was working on the concept of Bag End and the hill. And the more southern-facing garden and windows, I think, is a little bit misconceived, especially based on his watercolor that he released for The Hobbit, where he sort of morphed that perspective in order to show you the entirety of Bag End. Anyways, I get way too obsessed with studying these various details, but I'm mainly pointing out that I made it the more typical way myself, because that's the way I originally designed my hill in this world, and it would be an incredibly complicated process to change it. And in Minecraft, it would prove as an special difficulty, because laying out Bag End like that would not be very easy, or it would just require massive change, which I don't really want to make. But anyways, this illustration I think sort of points well to the layout of the front hall and then the sharp turn down the garden path, which I tried to mimic as best I could, even though my layout is different. Moving on to more simpler means, this is a illustration of the kitchen of Bag End that I've admired and quite inspired my design of part of the kitchen in Bag End. It's more simple things like this that I've taken a lot of inspiration for. This is an illustration of John Howe's that I've always really admired, of the Black Riders in the Shire. Now, I don't think John Howe meant this to be any particular place, it was just Black Riders in the Shire. However, whenever I've seen this image, it always makes me think of the end of Bagshot Row, where Frodo overhears one of the Black Riders speaking to Gaffer Gamgee. I think one of the elements that's connected that image with that setting is the white steps on the right side, because Bilbo had a set of white steps cut into the bank leading into the party field, which is above Bagshot Row. That's always been one of my favorite parts of the book, just because literally the Black Riders being, at the foot of the hill at Bag End, at the beginning of the story, as the adventure's beginning, I think it's a really intimidating and spooky kind of element. I tried to sort of mimic this image at the bend of the road that leads to the end of Bagshot Row down from Bag End, and it hasn't translated very well, but it went largely behind the inspiration for that particular area. Here we have another simple example of an illustration by Jemima Catlin for The Hobbit that inspired a fireplace area in the living room parlor of Bag End. The only missing element here that I still want to add is Sting hanging above the fireplace. I don't mean to point out the obvious, but obviously the front hall of Bag End was inspired very directly by Tolkien's illustration of the front hall of Bag End, but I also took inspiration from other people's interpretations of this. And I still might add the white and black tiles on the floor. They've just always been a bit too stark for me in game, but I think they're sort of winning me over. This is a perspective of Hobbiton by one of my favorite Tolkien artists, Mate Cadil. I'm probably butchering his name, but he used his creativity to make sort of a different perspective of Tolkien's classic illustration. I just really like and enjoy this art piece, and it's helped me to form the layout, using a little bit of a different perspective on it. Here's a couple shots of Bywater, which I'm currently working on. I've actually made more progress since taking these shots, but I don't even know why I'm including this, but I sort of based Bywater's layout a little bit based on what I thought was an image that I've seen, but I really think it's just an image I came up with in my head, because I cannot find an image like this anywhere, even though I swear I've seen it. But I'm using this to point out that oftentimes I have a very, very specific image in my head of a certain place, which usually forms when I'm reading the book, and I try to very directly translate those imaginations into my world, because I think that's very important that, it's depicted in the way that the book inspires me to imagine. The sort of western end of Bagshot Row was, I took a lot of inspiration from this illustration from one of my favorite Tolkien illustrators, Miriam Ellis. Some of the most beautiful, whimsical, wonderful Tolkien art that I've ever seen. So this particular illustration I really connected with and wanted to sort of make it look similar in my world. This is the bottom of the western side of the hill. In the book, Frodo and Pippin meet Sam here at the beginning of a narrow lane that runs west out of Hobbiton. They meet at a gate out of some meadows that leads onto the lane. This illustration, which I don't think is meant to be that particular place, has always made me think of that moment in the book. And so when I was building this spot, I really had this picture in mind, although I do have to do a lot of alteration to this area, so it's also been changed a lot already. But anyways, it was inspiration there. Another fun fact about this area is this particular oak tree here was actually based off of one of my favorite oak trees in my neighborhood. And I often do take real life inspiration for things of that sort, and for gardens and stuff like that. Also, this version of the party tree that I built was actually based off of my favorite tree in my neighborhood, which is actually a London plane tree, not an oak tree, but I formed it based off of that tree, and I tried to make it look like that. Unfortunately, I actually downsized the party tree and made a new one recently, but I'm not sure what exactly I'm going to do with this old tree or where I'm going to put it, but I'll figure it out. Because after putting in all that effort to make it, I can't abandon it, so. This little corner of the water, I sort of was inspired by this illustration to sort of form it. looking similar to that. I've actually debated putting in a hobbit hole here, but I haven't yet decided. It just wouldn't really make sense, but I may do it. We'll have to see. I've always really liked this illustration of the green dragon, not as the green dragon itself, but it sort of made me think more of the ivy bush and how it's along the Bywater Road, surrounded by trees. And I've just always liked this concept of looking left from the door and looking down the road leading to Hobbiton, so I've sort of took inspiration from this picture to some degree. Well, folks, I think that's all I'm going to show you for today. I don't want this running too long, but I'm also running out of parallel ideas, so I hope you enjoyed this little look into the world and some of the details and inspirations that went into certain spots. I think one of my favorite parts is getting inspiration from various things and trying to bring that to fruition. I've been having so much fun in this world lately with so many massive undertakings and ideas. I can't wait to keep going with more projects here, so let me know if you enjoyed this and found it interesting. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I'm really excited to produce more content soon, so stay tuned, and I'm just going to sit down here and have a pint, and I hope you do the same, and I hope you have a wonderful, lovely, blessed day, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.